"You'll be in row 14, next to the service area," the coordinator droned, while my daughter-in-law smiled coldly. "My family will lose face if your poverty shows." My son lowered his head and stayed silent. No defense, not a single kind look. In the glittering hall, over strings and clinking glasses, I, the groom's mother, was seated behind even the photographers. I tightened my grip on the champagne flute, hearing the glass tremble in my hand. 10 years a widow, 40 years raising a child, and all I was worth was a seat at the very end. I didn't cry. I lifted my chin and walked straight to the last row as if I were stepping over my life's worst humiliation. And when I sat down, a silver-haired man in a sleek black suit placed his hand over mine and whispered, "Let's pretend we came together." I turned, my heart stopping. He was the first love I thought I'd lost forever. They had no idea that from that moment on, the one getting pushed out of a seat today wouldn't be me. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Mabel Carter, 66, widowed for 3 years. I taught English at a public high school on Chicago's South Side for more than 40 years. I'm not wealthy, but I get by on my pension and the small house my husband and I owned. I thought I'd made peace with loneliness after my husband, Harold, died of lung cancer. But today, at my son's lavish wedding, I finally understood. Real loneliness is when people are alive and still deny you basic respect. The ceremony was at the Devon estate, a sprawling property owned by Camille's family, the very people who never accepted me from day one. Everything felt so showy it was almost numb. Tables draped in crisp white, Moet and Chandon flowing like a stream, guests in designer labels, and white roses stretching out like Versailles. In my clean but worn navy dress, I felt like an ink stain on a luxury canvas. When staff pointed me to my seat, I almost couldn't believe it. Row 14, directly behind the service area after the photographers and the flower handlers. Up front, Camille's mother, Patricia Devon, sat among a row of society women in gleaming pearls. They looked at me and murmured. I clearly heard one say to the woman beside her, "Is that the groom's mother? I heard she taught at a public school, must have been rough." Another gave a small laugh, her voice dripping with disdain. "I heard she had to pick up extra shifts at the library just to make ends meet." I said nothing. I sat on the cold chair, back straight, hands on my lap, willing myself not to shake. Up at the front, Bryce looked different, tailored suit, perfect smile, standing with the ease of someone who'd forgotten what it meant to be poor. I remembered the little boy who came home with muddy sleeves, handed me a bunch of dandelions and said, "Mom, these are for you because you're the prettiest in the world." I smiled, then felt my nose sting. Where did that little boy go? The music rose. Camille came down the aisle in a wedding gown so long it needed 2 people to carry. Light flashed off the diamonds at her throat, making me squint. She never looked at me, not once. I was a shadow she wanted erased from the frame. Just as I was about to lower my head to escape the contempt around me, the chair beside me slid. An older man, silver hair shining in the sun, sat down. A whisper of bergamot cologne drifted over. He wore a Swiss watch. His movements were slow, refined. I thought he'd made a mistake and was about to say something when I heard his voice low, steady, certain. "Let's pretend we came together." I froze. He leaned in with a calm smile and gently set his hand over my clenched one. The touch made me stiffen for a few seconds, but strangely, there was no embarrassment, only warmth. From the front, I saw guests beginning to turn. Their eyes changed from pity to curiosity, and then, slowly, to caution. A woman in a feathered hat whispered to her husband, "Who's that man with the groom's mother? He looks powerful." I didn't turn, but I caught the hint of a smile at the corner of the man's mouth. On the stage, Bryce glanced down and his gaze landed on us. In that instant, his face went pale. I saw his lips move like he wanted to ask something but didn't dare. Camille followed his stare. When she saw me smiling, speaking with the mysterious man, her face went rigid. I didn't know what game I'd been pulled into, but I could feel the power dynamic shift. Those who'd looked down on me were now more careful. Those who had turned away began to watch. I tilted my head and whispered, "I don't understand what you're doing." Without looking at me, he said, "Just smile. Your son's about to look again." I did. When Bryce glanced down a second time, he looked as if he'd seen the impossible. In the very spot where he'd arranged for his own mother to be humiliated, I now seemed to be, seated with a man worthy of the front row, maybe even their betters. "Perfect," he murmured, squeezing my hand a bit. "Now they don't know where to place you in their picture anymore." I looked at him, a mix of surprise and gratitude in my chest. "Who are you?" I asked softly, just for him to hear. He tilted his head, deep blue eyes holding an answer I'd waited for my whole life. "Someone you should have crossed paths with again a long time ago." I didn't have time to grasp it all. The minister kept speaking, violins kept playing, and all eyes stayed on the couple. But I knew, with a few light touches and a smile, the entire order of this event had cracked. Half skeptical, half curious looks stayed on us through the ceremony. I caught fragments of whispers. "Is he someone in finance? He looks familiar. Wasn't he on the cover of Forbes?" I didn't reply, only pressed my lips together and looked up at the platform where my son vowed himself to a woman who had tried to banish his mother to the service row. Oddly enough, I felt calm. Maybe because, for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. A breeze from the garden brushed my hair, as if whispering, "It's time, Mabel." I didn't know why the words rang in my head, but my heart did. This wasn't Bryce's wedding day anymore. It was the day I came back to myself. I didn't know who the man beside me truly was or why he chose to help. But from the way he held my hand and redirected the room's gaze, I sensed something was about to change for good. When the applause started, I stood up on instinct. He leaned toward my ear and said, "Let them wonder." I looked around. The people who'd pitied me now watched like I was a riddle. Up front, Camille's mother frowned. Bryce glanced down, eyes frantic. Camille gripped his hand tighter, afraid, unsettled, and lost. And me? I simply smiled. For the first time in years, I felt light. Deep down, I knew no one had the power to make me sit in the last row anymore. As the wedding music faded and the clapping thinned, the man at my side tipped his head and spoke softly, just for me, "We finally meet again, Mabel." I lifted my face to ask who he was, and the slant of afternoon light across his silver hair revealed deep blue eyes, the exact blue I'd memorized half a century ago. I froze. The sound around us, music, chatter, fell away until only his face remained. "Sebastian?" My voice caught in my chest. He smiled and nodded slowly. "Call me Seb, the way you used to." I could hardly breathe. That name, I hadn't spoken it in 50 years. I thought I'd forgotten, but memories don't die, they only sleep. We stayed quiet for a few minutes as the clapping dwindled and the crowd drifted off. I noticed his hand still holding mine warm, steady, as if no years had passed at all. "You've changed a lot, but your eyes haven't," Seb said gently, his voice deeper and a touch rough with age. "When the minister read the vows, you still bit your lip." I saw. I laughed through a tight throat, embarrassed and moved. "You remember things like that?" "I don't forget anything about you, Mabel. Especially the things that once made life feel meaningful." I looked away, hiding the tear that had slipped free. As people began to scatter, Seb said, "Walk with me? I've got a lot to tell you." I nodded. We left the reception and wandered into the garden behind the mansion, where rows of lavender perfumed the evening breeze. Voices and laughter faded, leaving only the soft crunch of our shoes on gravel. I looked for you for years, Seb began, eyes straight ahead. That year I went to London for a business program. I thought I'd be gone a few months. I wrote you dozens of letters, sometimes one every week, sent to your old home address. I stopped. A breeze shivered across my shoulders. I never got a single one. Seb turned, his eyes filling with shock and a deep sadness. Not one? No calls, no messages? I shook my head. Not a word. I thought you'd forgotten me or found someone else. My mother told me you were the kind of man who only cared about money. Seb closed his eyes, exhaling hard. Margaret, I suspected. When I came back, I called and was told you'd moved with no forwarding address. I went to the house, but they said it had been sold. I was quiet, his words falling like rain on a field of parched memories. Loose pieces slid into place, years of waiting for letters that never came, my mother's refrain, marry someone stable, don't be foolish for love, I whispered, almost confessing. She hid everything. She even erased the messages on the landline. I was naive and believed you'd moved on. Then I met Harold, kind, steady, safe, and convinced myself it was for the best. Seb stepped closer, eyes glassy. I came back to Chicago twice after that, once in 1978, then in 1980. The first time, I hired someone to find you, but you were married. The second time, I saw your wedding photo in the paper and knew I was too late. I gave a small, aching smile. 50 years late, Seb. Maybe fate kept a sliver of mercy for us. He nodded, voice rough. I never married. There were a few women, but I couldn't keep going when I kept comparing them to you. For years, I read about you, your teaching awards, the students you helped. You were always the person I believed would change the world, quietly but for real. I turned away, not wanting him to see my red eyes. Thank you, but I was just a regular teacher. My life was calm, safe. Only sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wondered, if your letters had reached me, would I be sitting here with you now? Seb touched my arm lightly. Don't blame yourself, Mabel. We did what we thought was right. I only regret we let someone else decide for us. The words lodged in my throat. I thought of my mother, strict, controlling, obsessed with the safest path. I loved her, and I resented her. Because of her, my life turned a different way. We stopped by a small garden pond, its surface catching the late sun. Seb sat on a stone bench and motioned for me to join him. He pulled a small object from his pocket, an old photo with yellowed edges. A young woman with brown hair smiled brightly, holding a fistful of wildflowers. I've carried this since 1972. My hands shook as I took it. I thought you'd have thrown this away long ago. No, he said with a soft smile. I once thought if I kept it, I'd never love anyone else. Then I realized letting go isn't forgetting, it's accepting that love can exist even when the person isn't there. I looked down at the photo, my voice small. I loved Harold, Seb, truly. But he never saw me the way you did. Our marriage was peaceful, responsible, affectionate, but it didn't have a spark. Maybe I learned to live without being seen. Seb pressed a hand to his chest. And I, somehow, lived as if I were still seeing you. Strange, isn't it? A man can pass 1,000 faces and only remember one pair of eyes. I steadied myself. You know, some nights I dreamed we were back at Romano's, the little Italian place on 12th Street where I used to steal the olives from your salad. Seb laughed deep, still young somehow. And you got caught because I counted how many were left. I remember. You blushed the whole evening. We both laughed, the sound mixing with lavender on the air and the hush of water, like memories getting dusted clean. My life has gone far from where we started, Seb said after a quiet moment. I built a company, met politicians, walked into rooms full of powerful people. And in moments like that, I remembered the 18-year-old girl on the front steps, reading Whitman to me. My throat tightened. Don't say these things, Seb. We're too old to dream like that. He smiled, tipping his head, eyes still bright as ever. No, Mabel, we don't need to go back. We only need to choose the next 20 years well. I stayed quiet. The pond reflected two older people sitting side by side, two who once loved madly, lost each other to pride and control, and now sat hand in hand, no longer young, but no longer afraid. The breeze lifted the lavender again. I looked at him for a long time, feeling something strange, peace and revival twined together. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but in that moment I knew one thing for sure. My tired heart could still say yes. We were still by the pond when urgent footsteps sounded behind us. I turned to see Bryce and Camille striding over, faces tight like they were rushing to put out a fire. Her gown snagged on the grass, but she didn't care. She yanked Bryce along. "Mom, right now," Bryce said, low but rattled. "We need to talk." I exhaled, staying seated. Beside me, Seb remained steady, eyes on the two kids coming toward us, unruffled. Camille reached us first, stared straight at Seb, and spoke like a blade. "Who are you?" Seb smiled, stood, adjusted his tie like he was stepping into a meeting, and answered evenly, "I'm someone who once mattered a great deal to Mabel." The air froze. Bryce blinked, as if trying to assemble pieces he'd never seen before. Camille frowned, stepped back, then dropped her voice to a sharp hiss. "I'm serious. This is my son's wedding, not a place for strangers." I rose, voice calm. "Camille, you're speaking to my guest, and he is most certainly not a stranger." Seb gave me a brief nod enough to steady me. He said clear and level, "I'm sorry if my presence bothers you, Miss Devon. But perhaps you should worry more about how you treat your mother-in-law than about other people's resumes." Camille froze like she'd been slapped. Bryce reached out, trying to ease the moment, but Seb went on before they could speak. I watched from start to finish a mother pushed to the last row at her own son's wedding. Humiliation dressed up as honor and money. I heard Bryce take a sharp breath. "No, you've got it wrong," he said quickly. "It was just a seating mix-up. Staff placed the rows wrong. There was no intent." I faced my son and held his eyes. "A mix-up or a choice, Bryce?" He went quiet. For me, that question needed no answer. Camille jumped in, scrambling to salvage control. "Mabel, I think you're being too sensitive. Everyone was busy and, our family's reputation had to be protected." "Reputation?" Seb cut in, still polite but cool. "If your reputation is built on diminishing others, you might want to revisit your definition." Color rose beneath Camille's makeup, whether from shame or anger didn't matter. Bryce looked lost, fingers tight around his glass. He glanced at me, as if asking me not to make this worse. This time, I didn't rescue them. Seb slid a hand into his pocket, speaking slowly with the weight of power he didn't need to flaunt. "As it happens, I just finalized a deal 2 weeks ago. My firm, Whitmore Capital, acquired the downtown commercial building where Devon Realty Group has its headquarters." The air changed instantly. Bryce's head snapped up. Camille looked like she didn't trust her ears. "What did you say?" she stammered. "The building on Michigan Avenue?" Seb nodded, gaze calm to the point of merciless. "That's right. The deal closed last week. I only remembered the detail when I saw the Devon logo on the wedding stage." Silence crashed over the garden. Camille's face drained, her expensive makeup no match for raw panic. Bryce stood still, mind racing. Seb looked at them, his voice quiet. No need to raise it. "I hadn't planned to discuss business here, but perhaps this coincidence is well-timed." Then he turned to me, the gentle smile returning. "Mabel, it's been a long day. We should leave. There's a place by the lake I'd like to take you to dinner, if you're willing." I smiled, no hesitation. "I'd like that." Camille's eyes widened. "You're leaving in the middle of the reception?" People are waiting for the family photos." I turned, answering softly but clearly, "Family? Are you sure that's what you want to capture?" "A mother parked by the service station?" Bryce drew a breath, ready to say something, but I stepped forward, slower and firmer than I'd ever been. "I'm not an obligation for you to manage anymore, Bryce. From now on, I choose my own place." Seb held out his hand. I placed mine in his, and a strange steadiness spread through me. Simple, but the whole garden seemed to hold its breath. As we walked away, whispers trailed behind, curiosity edged with respect. Someone murmured just, loud enough for me to catch, "Is that really Sebastian Whitmore? And he's with the groom's mother? I can't believe it. If so, the Devons are in trouble." I didn't look back. I only held Seb's hand and followed the stone path to the back gate. The breeze moved through the maples, lavender and champagne mingling in the air. With every step, another layer of old dust fell away. At the car, Seb opened my door like we were 20 again. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "If I'd known today was your son's wedding, I'd have come sooner. Maybe everything happens for a reason." I looked at him, a feeling I couldn't name rising relief and ache twined together. "You don't owe me an apology, Seb. If anyone does, it's those who treat love and respect like bargaining chips." He smiled, soft as the afternoons I remember. "Then tonight let me feed you well and talk for a long time like two old friends waking from a long dream." His car rolled out of the garden, catching the last light on the glass. Through the window, I watched the trees sway and Bryce and Camille shrink into the murmuring crowd. No one walked us out, and no one dared stop us. But I knew, in many eyes left behind, pity had vanished, replaced by something else: respect. I turned to the man at the wheel and asked quietly, "You know, all day I thought I was completely alone, but I wasn't, was I?" Without looking away from the road, Seb answered, "No one is truly alone, Mabel. Sometimes the one who sees us best walks in just when we think our light's gone out." I sat back, watching the window turn gold with sunset. For the first time in years, my heart beat slow and peaceful, and somehow stronger. I didn't know how the night would end. I only knew this: the woman in row 14 didn't sit there anymore. Lakeview Terrace sat right on Lake Michigan, walls of glass catching the last spill of daylight. Evening light washed the silk curtains gold. Soft, jazz drifted in a mellow saxophone threading through the quiet clink of silverware and the low laughter of a few couples nearby. Seb chose a small corner table facing the water, where white sails in the distance looked like fragments of memory floating by. He pulled out my chair, still precise and thoughtful, as if 50 years had never been cut away. "You still like sitting by the window," he said gently. "Remember the first time at Romano's? You chose the table by the glass so the light would hit the food just right." I laughed, fingers brushing the water glass. "You remember that?" "Everything connected to you," he said, eyes warm and deep. The server arrived. Seb didn't need a menu. Lasagna with beef, a caprese salad, no onions, and a small pour of Italian red, not chilled. I stared at him, astonished. "That's exactly what I ordered 50 years ago." He only smiled and nodded for the server to go. We let a gentle silence settle. I watched the ripples on the lake mirror the first city lights. It was so peaceful I didn't know where to begin. In the end, Seb spoke first. He wanted to know how I'd been living all these years. He'd read in the papers that my students loved me, but he wanted to hear it from me. I smiled, slowly. I taught English for 42 years. Maybe what makes me happiest is when former students come back to visit. Some bring their little kids and say I'm the reason they went to college. I paused, then continued. In those last years I was teaching while caring for Harold. His illness stretched on for more than 2 years. Every evening I read him the Whitman poems he loved. After he was gone, I kept reading, as if he were still sitting there. Seb listened without interrupting. Now and then he nodded, his eyes holding a sorrow I didn't dare look at for long. After Harold died, I thought I'd gotten used to loneliness. I went on, my voice turning hoarse. But really, I was just living in silence. Bryce called me every 2 weeks, right on the dot, asked the same 3 questions. Are you well? Do you need anything? I'm very busy. That tone, like he was calling out of obligation, Seb sighed. I understand. Obligation is the worst form of love. It pretends to care, but the heart is gone. I gave a small laugh, then asked, What about you, Seb? Did you ever have someone? He leaned back slightly, looking out at the lake. Yes, a few, but it always felt unfair to them. No matter how good they were, I kept comparing them to someone who'd gone very far away. In the end, I chose to live alone. Alone, but not empty. Maybe because I always believed you were okay somewhere. That line made my heart pinch. For a moment, I saw the 18-year-old boy again, sitting under the tree in front of my house, notebook in his arms, smiling every time I read a poem. The server brought our food, the lasagna fragrant and steaming. I took a bite. The richness of meat, cheese, and tomato sauce spread across my tongue, and I suddenly laughed. What is it? Seb asked. It's just, this tastes as good as it did back then. And I almost cried because of it. Cry if you want. There's nothing wrong with letting yourself be moved. I shook my head, swallowed slowly, then whispered, No, I don't want to cry anymore. I want to remember it with a smile. We ate unhurriedly, each sentence filling in the gaps of the years we'd lost. When the red wine was topped off, Seb rested an elbow on the table, the light casting a warm gold in his eyes. Mabel, we can't turn back time, but we can choose tomorrow. I looked at him in silence. Inside me, something both strange and familiar stirred, as if an old heart were waking from a long sleep. You make it sound too simple, I answered, my voice trembling. Because it really is simple. Happiness doesn't need magic, only the courage to start again. Before I could reply, my phone buzzed in my purse. I glanced down 7 missed calls from Bryce and 3 messages from Camille. They all said the same thing. Who is Sebastian Whitmore? Mom, where are you? Do you know what kind of man he is? I set the phone face down and exhaled slowly. They've started digging into you. Seb smiled lightly. Of course, the Devons never rest easy when they don't know what someone can do to them. Aren't you afraid? I asked, half joking, half serious. Afraid? I've been through much bigger battles. They should only be afraid if they keep looking down on people. I laughed. You're as confident as you used to be. No, Mabel. I just believe in the justice of cause and effect. Those who sow contempt will bow their heads to reap it. I switched the phone to silent. For the first time in years, I didn't feel compelled to respond to my child right away. A quiet settled over me, not loneliness, but true peace. What are you planning after you leave Chicago? I asked, nudging the talk away from power and shadows. Seb leaned back, eyes far away. I've been thinking about Tuscany. There's a small village called Montefiorale. Good wine, clear skies, lavender blooming all summer. I laughed. You don't have a house there. He chuckled back. I'll buy one. We both laughed freely, not tamped down by politeness or fear of judgment. I realized it had been a very long time since I'd felt this kind of positive excitement, not worry, but the anticipation that something good might come. After the meal, Seb called for the check before I could reach for my wallet. Let me. You can get the next one, if we meet again. I looked at him and smiled. You just wrote the next invitation yourself. I know. And I hope you won't cancel. At the door, the lake breeze slipped in with a touch of salt and cold. I pulled my wrap tighter, watching the city lights flicker in his eyes. Thank you for dinner, Seb. Thank you for coming. If you hadn't walked to row 14, I might never have had the chance to see you again. I said nothing, not because I had nothing to say, but because any words felt extra. I simply nodded and turned away. When I climbed into a cab home, the phone buzzed again, 4 more missed calls from Bryce. I watched the screen glow in the dark, then tapped mute notifications. That night, I didn't call back. I sat by the window, looking out at Lake Michigan shimmering in the moonlight, and realized it had been a long time since I'd felt this light inside. Tomorrow, I'd have to face Bryce and Camille and that world out there. But tonight, it was just me and the calm of being seen, heard, and remembered. And somewhere in Chicago, I believed Seb was looking out at the lake too, facing the same direction where the lights met the water and the past finally let go. 3 days after that evening, by the lake, my phone rang while I was watering the plants on the porch. Bryce's voice came through, trying to sound steady but failing to hide the strain. "Mom, are you free tonight? Camille and I want to take you to dinner at River House." River House, the most upscale restaurant in Chicago, the kind you book a week ahead. I knew they weren't inviting me out of filial devotion. I wiped my hands and smiled slightly. "Of course I can go." On the other end, Bryce exhaled, like he'd just completed a tough assignment. That evening, the restaurant glowed with candlelight, the polished wood floor reflecting warm gold. I arrived on time in a simple blush pink dress and the pearl earrings Harold once gave me. When the server opened the private room, I saw Camille already seated, wearing a French label I'd seen on a magazine cover. Next to her, Bryce scrolled his phone, looking worn out. "Mom." Camille stood and flashed a radiant smile like nothing had ever happened between us. "You look wonderful tonight. Your skin is glowing. Must be that good company makes people shine, right?" I looked at her, smiling lightly but not too much. "That's right, Camille. Good companies, good partners, and good manners, those things always make people shine." Bryce's hand paused on his water glass. Camille pressed her lips together, trying to hold the smile. We sat. The private room felt luxurious but cold, like a meeting wrapped in velvet. Under the table, Seb quietly took my hand. He sat beside me, composed, his gaze calm and steady. That handhold wasn't showy, but it made me feel strangely safe, like a reminder I wasn't alone anymore. The server poured wine and slipped away. Camille started with small talk: vacations, new projects, charity events. Everything came out in a flat, practiced tone, like she was executing a strategy rather than having a conversation. I stayed quiet, smiling at the right moment so she wouldn't know how. Clearly I was listening. When the main course arrived, grilled wagyu with truffles, Bryce set down his knife and looked at me. "Mom, I actually wanted to talk a bit about work." I took a sip of wine. "Yours or mine?" he faltered. Camille cut in, voice soft as fluff but edged with calculation. "Whitmore Capital just bought the building where our company's headquarters are. It would be wonderful if your side could consider keeping the current lease. We could all benefit." Seb looked up, not rushing. He cut a piece of meat with measured movements, then said evenly, "Business is business, Miss Devon. No one gets to change terms based on personal ties if the conditions aren't right." I saw a tendon jump in Camille's neck. Bryce forced a thin smile and tried, "I think things can be flexible as long as both sides want it." Seb set down the knife, a rare sharpness flickering in his eyes. "I'm only flexible with people who know how to show respect." The braze. Words drifted out like a breath, yet the room fell absolutely silent. I straightened, set my glass down, and said gently but clear, "Before we talk business, maybe we should talk about something more important. Respect." Bryce looked at me, flustered. "Mom, I know there was a little misunderstanding at the wedding." I cut in. "It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. You chose to seat me in the last row, behind the service area. You chose silence when your wife said my poverty would shame her family." Camille jumped in fast. "I didn't mean harm, Mabel. I just wanted the ceremony to look perfect." I'm sorry if my words hurt you. I looked straight at her, my voice low but firm. Camille, are you sorry you said it, or sorry it has consequences now? I wasn't angry. I just needed a sincere apology. But sometimes sincere is the hardest thing to give. And when someone apologizes to you, what makes you believe they truly regret it? Share it with me, so I know I'm not the only one who's wrestled with that. The question made Camille choke up, and Bryce lifted his eyes to mine, torn between guilt and confusion. He took his wife's hand, his voice getting smaller. Mom, I really am sorry. I shouldn't have stayed silent that day. I just didn't want to mess up the ceremony. Mess it up? I asked softly. More than seating your mother by the service station? You once promised your father you'd never make me feel left out. That day, I've never felt more foreign to my own son. Bryce lowered his head. I heard a spoon gently tap a plate. Camille set it down, trying to hide her irritation. Seb spoke up, quiet but impossible to dismiss. Whitmore Capital didn't buy that building to make trouble. But we respect principles. Those who act right will always be treated right. They both understood. Camille slid back into politeness. Of course. I just thought, we're family. We could find a way to work together so no one loses. I took another sip of wine, the tannins blooming lightly on my tongue. Family isn't a contract, Camille. I don't need collaboration. I need respect. She forced a smile and shifted to congratulating the fresh start of our marriage, but her voice had lost its ease. I listened, but said nothing more. The meal ended in polite silence. Only the distant jazz filled the space between us. When the server cleared dessert, Seb stood first and pulled out my chair. I think we should go, Mabel. Let's not let anyone mistake this for a negotiation. I rose and turned to my son. Bryce, I hear your apology. But forgiveness takes time. It's not something you can propose. He nodded, eyes damp but controlled. Camille stood still, lips pressed tight. Before I left, I looked at the two young people, the child I raised with sweat, and the woman I once believed would make him happy. I hope when you say, I'm sorry, it's because you mean it, not because you're afraid of losing a contract or status. No one answered. The table light reflected my face calm, not angry, not bitter. I turned and walked out with Seb. On the way home, the city blazed, towers like glass blocks against the night. In the car, Seb stayed quiet, giving me room to think. After a while, he said softly, You held the ground, Mabel. I'm proud of you. I looked out the window, a faint smile rising. Maybe I finally learned what you've known all along, that silence can be stronger than words. He nodded and found my hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. That night, I didn't feel tired. Maybe because, for the first time in years, I'd walked out of a conversation without feeling smaller. I didn't forgive quickly. I know forgiveness is a privilege, and this time, I won't hand it out easily. The next morning, I was making tea when the doorbell rang. The sound was even slow, arrogant, the kind of a person who rings not to wait, but to command. I opened the door. Patricia Devon, Camille's mother, stood there. She looked just as she had at their engagement party. A cream cashmere coat, a triple-strand pearl necklace, and a smile with more arithmetic than goodwill. Mabel, dear, I hope I'm not intruding. Her voice floated, barely hiding the appraisal in her eyes. You're not. Please come in. She crossed the threshold and let her gaze sweep the living room. I recognize that look from people who live in luxury they don't admire. They appraise. The wooden chair I'd bought at a yard sale, the clock Harold once repaired by hand, the old picture frames on the wall, everything seemed to be filtered through a lens of money. Charming, she said, her mouth smiling but not her eyes. Cozy, if a bit. Modest. I poured tea and slid a cup toward her. Please. Patricia set her handbag on the table and clicked open the clasp. She drew out a check and set it. neatly between our cups. The words $50,000 were printed clearly. I looked up. She smiled, voice level, like discussing the weather. "This is not a bribe, Mabel. It's simply a way for both sides to benefit. If you could persuade Mr. Whitmore to keep the lease in place for Devon Realty's headquarters, this is yours." I leaned back and kept quiet a few seconds. Morning light coming through the window caught the tabletop, making the check gleam like a piece of metal. "Are you bribing me?" I asked slowly. Patricia smiled, tinged with arrogance. "I call it an arrangement. Smart people don't use the word bribe. This is a chance for you to help your family and receive a fair token in return." I glanced at the check again, then out the window. In the yard, the rose bushes Harold planted were still in bloom, their scent riding the breeze onto the porch. I remembered his morning's clipping stems, telling me, "Mabel, roses are only beautiful when no one pays for them." I turned back with a faint smile. "You know, Harold used to say roses shouldn't be bought with money. I think people shouldn't be either." I picked up the check, feeling the thick paper, the fresh ink. Then the sound of tearing filled the quiet room. She startled, eyes wide, but I'd already ripped it into 4 neat pieces and set them on the saucer. "My worth, ma'am, is not for sale." Patricia raised an eyebrow, her smile flattening to a thin line. "Be careful with grand statements, Mabel. In this society, no one is truly free. Your family, your son, his work, everything can be affected." I stood, walked to the door, and slid the bolt. 3 days ago, I might have been afraid. Today, I'm free. "Keep your social influence. I'll keep my self-respect." She looked at me a long moment, her gaze cooling. "You're making a mistake. If keeping myself is a mistake, I don't need to be right." A beat of silence. Then she lifted her bag and stepped out. Before she left, she turned back, leaving a trace of Chanel, number 5 inches the air. "I hope when the consequences come, you still have enough confidence to smile." The door closed, leaving only the scent of expensive perfume and a storm of anger hanging in the air. I sat and looked at the shredded check on the saucer. Torn paper, but the ink still bright. Money is strange. It only has power if we let it define us. I gathered the pieces, dropped them in the trash, and washed my hands under the tap. Cold water slid over my fingers, rinsing away the grime of insult. In that moment, I felt an old part of me dying off to make room for something new, firmer, and freer. I picked up my phone and called Seb. He answered after the second ring. "I'm here. Mabel? Guess who came to see me this morning? I'm betting it wasn't someone delivering flowers," he joked lightly. I laughed, my voice still unsteady. "Patricia Devon. She brought a check for $50,000. I'm guessing so we can both benefit?" "You guessed right." "I don't think she liked the way I declined." Seb chuckled, a warm, low sound that drifted through the line like morning heat. "I'm proud of you, Mabel. Plenty of people would take that check and excuse it as practicality. But you're different," I sighed. "I don't want my life traded again. I was controlled for too long." "Then it's time we do the opposite," he said, steady. "This afternoon, come to my office. Meet Whitmore Capital's attorney. There are a few things I want to discuss with you." I was surprised. "An attorney? Is something wrong?" "Not trouble. An opportunity. Sometimes justice has to be rewritten by the very people who were dismissed." I was quiet for a moment, looking out at the yard where the sunlight lit the roses. "Are you sure, Seb?" "I've never set foot in a law office, I'm sure, and I want you there not for revenge so we can close out the old things." I smiled, feeling my heart suddenly light. "Okay, I'll come this afternoon." After I hung up, I sat by the window, watching the garden soak in the sun. The scent of roses drifted into the room, blending with the trace of Earl Grey still in the air. I thought of Harold, the one who taught me that self-respect isn't what we say. It's the choice we make when temptation shows up. And today, for the first time in a very long time, I chose myself. Not out of anger, but because I want to be free in this little house, in a rose garden no one can price. Outside, the clouds thinned, sunlight poured through the frame, and fell across the tea table and the stray scraps of check, glinting like small streaks of a new beginning. That afternoon, I went to Whitmore Capital as promised. The tower's glass caught the sun, imposing and cold, the kind of architecture that reminds you power doesn't have to shout, it just sits higher. Seb met, and me in the lobby, still in that familiar charcoal suit and deep blue tie. He smiled softly when he saw me, his eyes both encouraging and gentle. "You're here. Nora's waiting in the conference room." The room was on the 27th floor, with cherrywood paneling and a long table under muted lights. The woman at the head of the table stood as we entered, attorney Nora Patel, around 40, petite, with eyes sharp as a fresh blade. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Carter. I've heard a lot about you from Mr. Whitmore." We shook hands, her grip warm but decisive. A thick file lay on the table, tabbed with blue and red flags. Nora opened her laptop, her tone calm and professional. "I've reviewed the full file on Devon Realty Group. You may want to know a few things." The screen showed a financial analysis, numbers, charts, debt ratios, but Nora never let me get lost. She explained slowly and clearly, like a teacher used to speaking to people outside the business world. Devon Realty is currently running a very high financial leverage. In plain terms, they're carrying more debt than they can reasonably service over the next 18 months. They are almost entirely dependent on their current building, where Whitmore Capital holds 100% control. I stayed quiet, feeling my heartbeat slow. If the lease is terminated, they'll have to move everything: staff, data, client contracts. The average cost will be more than $200,000, not counting reputational damage in the market. Seb sat beside me with his fingers laced, eyes on me, as if asking silently, "Are you ready for them to taste the bitterness they served you?" Nora flipped a page. "There are two options. Option A, terminate the lease immediately." I heard the rustle of paper as she continued. "Option B, sign a new lease. But this time on our terms." I tilted my head, questioning with my eyes. Nora slid a draft toward me. "The new rent will be 18% higher. The term will be only 3 years instead of 10. More importantly, this lease will include a special clause, an ethics disclosure." I frowned. "An ethics disclosure?" Seb smiled slightly and nodded for Nora to go on. She did. "Yes. This clause requires Devon Realty to carry out 4 public actions as a precondition to continuing the lease." She listed them, voice clear, without hesitation. First, a public apology letter to Mrs. Mabel Carter, posted on Devon Realty's official website and in 2 local financial papers. Second, a commitment to corporate conduct standards, including language on respecting and protecting the dignity of older adults. Third, an annual contribution to the Chicago Elder Justice Fund, overseen by Whitmore Capital. And fourth, establishing the Harold Carter Memorial Scholarship for construction students, worth $10,000 each year for 5 years. The room went quiet. I looked down at Harold's name, and my heart trembled. His name appeared neat and solemn amid a page full of numbers, a tribute I never dared imagine. "What if they don't accept it?" I asked softly. Nora answered, calm but firm. "Then the lease will automatically terminate 72 hours after they receive the proposal letter. No court, no dispute. We simply cut access and reclaim the premises." I looked up at Seb. He said gently, "Sometimes justice doesn't need a prison. It just needs a contract that punishes the right people." I stayed silent for a long time. In my mind, I saw Camille, those haughty eyes, the half-smile, the voice that had choked me at the wedding. I remembered sitting in the last row, my hands shaking while no one cared. And now I had a chance to make them face what they'd done, not with revenge, but with consequences. I'll sign, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Seb turned to Nora and nodded. Add her as a co-signer. She's the one who was harmed and the one who has the right to close this story. Nora smiled and jotted a few notes. I'll send the formal version to Devon Realty this afternoon. Their response deadline is 72 hours. She stood, gathered the files, then held out her hand. Mrs. Carter, it's an honor to see someone choose dignity over fear. I believe when a woman speaks up, many things change. I shook her hand, feeling the strength in those small fingers. When Nora left the room, Seb remained, his gaze warm and deep. Mabel, you know I don't just want them to learn a lesson. I want you to see that humiliation wasn't meaningless. You turned it into an outcome. I smiled faintly, a rush of hard-to-name feelings rising part relief, part weight. I don't want revenge, Seb. I just want them to know they can't belittle people and keep living like they did nothing wrong. I know, and that's exactly why this is right. Outside the building, the afternoon wind kicked up. I stood, on the steps a moment, watching the rush of people. Beneath the traffic noise, a strange calm settled inside me. When I got home, dusk had fallen. I lit a small candle in front of Harold's photo. His face was still gentle in the frame, his smile holding both faith and forgiveness. The flame quivered against the glass. I spoke very softly, as if whispering back to the past. I protected myself, love, and I kept the honor of us both. The candlelight shimmered, climbed the wall, and washed across my hands. Outside, the night wind off Lake Michigan slipped through the window, carrying the scent of roses from the garden, the fragrance Harold loved. For the first time in years, I felt I was standing in the right place, not because anyone lifted me up, but because I had finally chosen not to bow. 2 days after the formal proposal went out, I was reading by the window when my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Bryce's name filled the screen, the third call in 10 minutes. I hesitated, then picked up. My son's voice came fast and panicked. Mom, you have to tell Mr. Whitmore to stop this right now. This is blackmail. I was quiet for a few seconds. Outside, the breeze stirred the curtain, morning light spilling across the table like water. No, Bryce, I said slowly. This isn't blackmail. These are consequences. On the other end, Bryce breathed hard, his voice tight to the point of breaking. They're demanding we apologize in public, set up a scholarship, and raise the rent by nearly 20%. You know that will kill the company. I'm trying to protect our family's dignity, yours too. I pressed my lips together and looked at the cold tea in front of me. Dignity, son? Where was your dignity when I was seated in row 14? When you let someone say your mother's poverty embarrasses us? No answer. Only Bryce's ragged breathing and a heavy silence stretching like a rope tightening at both ends. Finally, he spoke, lower now. Mom, I don't want to fight. I just want a deal. Tell me what you need to let this go. Money or something else? I gave a small laugh, not mocking, just bitter. A deal? Bryce, I don't need anything. I just want you to choose a side. A side? His voice jumped, surprised. Yes, between the family that humiliated me and the mother who gave birth to you. On the line, everything went still. I thought he'd hung up until I heard a rough, shaky whisper. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything. Think, I said. Because for the first time in your life, Bryce, you can't buy or bargain with your mother's self-respect. I was about to hang up, but paused, softening my tone. Do you remember when you were 8? You told me you'd never let anyone make me cry. On your wedding day, I cried. Not because I was insulted, but because you stayed silent. I heard a long inhale, then only quiet. A long quiet, heavy, as a decade of avoiding the mirror. At last, I said, gently like a goodbye, I hope you choose what's right this time. But I can't wait forever. Then I ended the call, refusing to let the conversation slide back into the old orbit where I had to soothe, yield, and soften other people's wrongs. That afternoon, I met Seb at a gallery in River North. No tension, no negotiating, just two people looking at abstract paintings for the penthouse Whitmore Capital was finishing. Seb wanted me to choose, but I've never been good at big decisions. For the first time in my life, I was about to say, "You pick," and stopped. I looked at a large canvas fields of blue and white, like the sky after a storm. "This one," I said, steady. "It makes me feel like I'm breathing." Seb smiled and nodded. "I think Harold would agree," I smiled back. "Harold would say this color shows dust too easily, but he'd agree." We stood together a long time, watching light strike. The wood frame. It felt strange in the best way to take part in a big decision without fear. No fear of being judged, no fear of being looked down on, no fear of being wrong. I realized the right to choose isn't a privilege, it's something I'd accidentally misplaced, loving too many people and forgetting myself. By the time I got home, twilight had settled. I set my bag on the table, turned on the light, and my phone pinged. Bryce. A short line, no period, no frills. "I need time." I sat with that message for a while. No anger, no joy, just an odd stillness. I typed back, "So do I, Bryce. But the clock is running." I put the phone face down and didn't check if he'd read it. I've learned love doesn't mean waiting without limits. Sometimes, to let someone grow up, you have to let them hear the ticking inside themselves slow, clear, and irreversible. That night, I took a warm bath, brewed lavender tea, and opened an old notebook. The yellowed pages, still, held Harold's handwriting. "To live is to know when to say enough when others think you won't dare." I closed the book and smiled. Outside, the wind off Lake Michigan moved softly and long. I lay down, pulled up the blanket, and listened to my heartbeat. No regret, no anger, just the lightness of invisible cords finally loosening around my chest. For the first time in years, I slept well without nightmares. No scene of me being shoved to the last row, no cold laugh from my daughter-in-law, no averted eyes from my son. Only me, a 66-year-old woman, peaceful in a small house, knowing that when I wake tomorrow, no one can take my self-respect away. On the third morning after the proposal letter went out, I woke earlier than usual. Soft light spilled over the curtains like milk. The house was silent except for the steady tick of the wall clock. Hour 71. If the timeline held, there was just under an hour before the offer expired. I was making tea when a phone rang. "Seb." "Mabel, put it on speaker. I think you should hear this call." Richard Devon, chairman of Devon Realty Group, came on low, cool, and for the first time in years, I heard a tremor. "Whitmore. I'm calling to confirm we accept all the terms." A pause. I could picture him gripping a coffee mug, fighting to keep his voice even. "Including the public apology, the fund contribution, and the scholarship. We'll sign and return it today." Seb stayed even, no gloating, no edge. "Good." "On time." 4 short words, and the other side knew the game was over. I heard Richard clear his throat, then add, as if to salvage a little dignity, "We hope it ends here." "No one wants more damage," Seb replied, soft as a breath. "The only person who was damaged, Mr. Devon, has already stood up. The rest is just procedure." Then he ended the call. The room fell still. I stood by the tea, my hand trembling, not from joy but because I knew there was no way back. All that had been hidden under family honor would now be public. The insults, the contemptuous looks, row 14, "My mother's poverty embarrasses us," all of it would be written down and covered by the press. Seb set a hand on my shoulder, his voice warm and low. "You okay?" I drew a deep breath and nodded. "I'm not scared, just, it feels strange, like I'm stepping through a doorway I never dared touch." He smiled. "You're not stepping alone. Nora confirmed the apology venue tomorrow night at the country club during the Chicago Children's fundraiser. Devon Realty is the lead sponsor. They want to announce the signing and apologize right on stage. I raised an eyebrow. In the middle of a fundraiser? Exactly. They want to win back face by showing social responsibility. For me, it's fitting justice, bowing their heads where they were proudest. I was quiet a long time, then asked softly, "You think I should go?" Seb looked at me, steady and kind. "I think you've listened to others speak for you long enough. It's time to show up for your own story." I nodded, warmth and fear braided together inside me. Then, "It's time." That afternoon, a text from Nora Patel arrived. "The final agreement has been signed." They sent the scan. "Tomorrow night, Mr. Richard Devon will read the apology. Media will be present." I stared at the words on the screen, then set the phone down. I knew that moment wouldn't just be a legal win, it would be a kind of moral justice. No one would be jailed, no one would lose their freedom, but everyone would have to face the truth of what they did. That evening, while clearing the table, my phone lit up. Bryce. I opened it to a short message. "Mom, I'll be there for the announcement. I think I need to hear it with my own ears." I read it again and again. A mix of warmth and worry rose in me. Part of me wanted to hold my son and say if he understood, I'd forgive him now. But another part whispered, "Don't go soft too soon, Mabel. Forgiveness should follow humility, not precede it." I typed back simply, "I know. Thank you for telling me." Then I set the phone down, inhaled slowly, and looked at Harold's photo on the table. His smile was as gentle as ever, steadying the flutter in my chest. That night, I opened the closet and took out the simple black dress Harold once praised. "Mabel, that color makes you look like a woman who knows exactly who she is," he'd said at our 25th anniversary party. It still fit. The fabric had softened with time. I pressed it, hung it on the window to catch the morning sun, then sat before the mirror. My hair was more than half silver now, but I smoothed it back and twisted it into a loose bun. No heavy powder, no bright lipstick, just a touch of foundation and small pearl studs. The lamp reflected a 66-year-old woman whose face was no longer taut, but whose eyes were clear. I looked at myself and whispered, "Not the woman in the last row anymore." I pictured tomorrow the bright room, the faces that once turned away, the shaking voice reading an apology. I didn't know if I'd smile, cry, or simply stand still, but I knew one thing. I would be there, head high, the way Harold would have wanted. Before bed, I got a short text from Seb. "I'll pick you up at 6 o'clock. Not early, not late." I replied, "Bring the contract. I want to see it in our hands. It'll be there." And so will I. I smiled and set the phone down. Outside, the Chicago sky held a pale wash of orange. A light wind off the lake carried damp hints of water. I closed my eyes without fear. What I felt was something else, like being given my life back, not to retaliate but to close the circle. Tomorrow, the world might chatter and the news might run with it, but I knew that beneath the noise, this would be the day Harold would be proud and say, "You stood up, Mabel." At last. The next afternoon, Chicago's sky was unusually clear. Sunlight scattered over Lake Michigan like silver leaf. I sat in the car beside Seb, clutching my small bag, calmer than I'd expected. We pulled into the country club, the venue for the Chicago Children's fundraiser. A line of luxury cars moved through the gate. Staff in black and white uniforms hurried back and forth. Everything looked as lavish and polished as if nothing had happened in the world. But inside me, everything had changed. I had stepped out of the shadow of the woman in the last row. Today, I wasn't there to witness. I was there to be witnessed as myself. Seb parked, turned to me, his eyes both reassuring and proud. "Ready, Mabel?" I nodded. "It's time." The country club's main hall sparkled. Round tables draped in crisp white, rows of crystal glasses, perfume mingling with jazz. As Seb and I walked in, familiar faces from the wedding turned to look. I saw women who had whispered about my old dress, men who had once shaken Richard Devon's hand with deference. Their eyes had a new tone now, not contempt, but a mix of curiosity and caution. A server guided us to the front rows, near the press area. I spotted Bryce in the first row to the right, shoulders rounded, hands clasped. Beside him, Camille wore an emerald dress. Makeup immaculate, but even from a distance, I could see the faint tremor at her mouth. When the clock struck 7 p.m., the stage lights softened. The host announced a special moment of social responsibility. Then, Richard Devon, chairman of the group, took the stage, voice low and controlled, working to sound composed. Tonight, on behalf of Devon Realty, we offer a public apology to Mrs. Mabel Carter, who was shown disrespect by someone in our own family. He paused and looked to the front row. Camille stood. No wedding lights now, no proud smile, just a young woman with downcast eyes, a paper shaking in her hand. "I'm Camille Devon," she said, voice thin but clear. "On my wedding day, I said something unforgivable, that my mother-in-law's poverty would embarrass our family. I also put her in row 14 near the service area and left her there as if she didn't belong to us." A ripple moved through the hall. A few people raised hands to their mouths. Camille continued, her voice catching. "Today, I understand that wealth isn't what you own, it's how you treat people. I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter. And I'm sorry to myself for being so small." The room held its breath. No laughter, no chatter. Even the cameras stilled for a few seconds, as if no one dared break that strange moment. No one had ever confessed so plainly, and no apology had ever been so public. I stood and walked slowly to the handheld mic the staff extended. I didn't look at the crowd or the cameras. I looked only at Camille, the daughter-in-law who had made me feel like a shadow in my own family. "I acknowledge your apology," I said, even neither cold nor shaking. A brief stillness. "I'm not saying forgive, because forgiveness can't happen in a day. But I acknowledge it because maybe for the first time we're telling the truth to each other." Camille bowed her head. Tears fell onto the paper crushed in her hand. I turned to Bryce. He lifted his face, eyes red, and I knew for the first time my son truly saw me, not as a mother meant to endure, but as a woman with the right to stand tall. The hall stayed quiet, and then the applause came, not loud, but real. Reporters began to shoot again, flashes strobed. I heard a whisper behind me. "Is that Mrs. Carter? The one they put in the last row?" She looked so steady. No one said it out loud, but I felt it. The social scales had shifted. Those who once kept silent in the face of insult were now watching a lesson in dignity, and they knew they couldn't dismiss it anymore. After the program, I left with Seb. Night had fallen, but the lights around the golf course still glowed. Crickets sang in the breeze. I took Seb's arm, shoulders back, steps sure, each one shedding a layer of heavy memory. A reporter hurried after us and asked, "Mrs. Carter, do you have anything you'd like to say?" I stopped and smiled. Sometimes the silence of the weak is what makes the powerful smug. But when the weak stand up, the world has to listen. Then I walked on, without looking back. In the car, Seb squeezed my hand. "You okay?" I nodded. "Better than ever." He smiled, eyes gentle as wind. On the drive home, my phone buzzed. "Bryce." I opened a short message. "Mom, can we talk?" I read it once, then twice. I felt calm, no anger, no surge of emotion, just the quiet of someone who knows she's done her part. I typed, "Tomorrow, you start." I set the phone down and watched the streetlights recede like little dots of the past. The breeze lifted my hair. I exhaled long and easy, like slipping off a soaked coat after a storm that lasted half a lifetime. That night, Back home, I slipped off my shoes and stood before the mirror. In the reflection, I no longer saw a woman bowing her head, afraid of being looked down on. I saw Mabel Carter composed, silver-haired, clear-eyed, standing straight. A woman who had passed through humiliation and silence and, at last, found herself again. The next morning, when the light was still mixed with mist, I heard a car stop at the gate. From the window, I saw Bryce step out. No Camille, no luxury car, no security, no flowers. It was just my son in a wrinkled dress shirt, hands in his pockets, looking worn out like he hadn't slept all night. I opened the door before he could press the bell. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. His voice no longer had the confidence of a young executive, nor the coldness I'd heard at the wedding. I nodded. "Come in, son." We sat in the living room. On the table were 2 cups of tea I had just made. He looked around the old house, Harold's framed photos, the bookcases I've kept the same. Everything seemed smaller in his eyes, but this time I saw no scrutiny there, only a quiet observation, like he was trying to see what he'd once overlooked. After a long moment, Bryce spoke. "Mom, I'm sorry." Not an apology to end the story, but to start over. I said nothing, just set my cup down. He drew a deep breath and went on, "I've been under more pressure than you think. Keeping up appearances, maintaining an image, living by the standards of the upper circle, it all felt like shackles. I was afraid people would laugh, afraid my wife would lose face, afraid I wasn't enough. But in all that fear, I forgot the most important thing. I looked at him, silent. I forgot you, and I forgot who I am." His voice caught a low note rare for a son who had always spoken like the wind. I answered slowly, "Bryce, I understand pressure, but remember this. Respect isn't a decoration to show off at a fancy party. It's a discipline for living. No one ever became poor by respecting others, but many became small by losing it." He bowed his head, fingers laced together. "I know, and I want to change, Mom. I'm just afraid you'll never forgive me." I exhaled slowly, then said, "Forgiveness isn't a gift, it's a process. But if you truly want to walk that road, I won't close the door." He looked up, a hint of hope in his eyes. I continued, "I only have 2 principles. 1, don't call me out of obligation. If you call, do it because you want to know how I'm doing. 2, the next time there's a family meal, don't leave me sitting alone. Invite me to the same table as someone who has a real place in your life." Bryce nodded, his voice soft. "I promise. Not because you asked, but because I want to." A warm silence settled between us. Outside, the wind stirred the rose petals in the garden, the one Harold used to tend. I knew that if he were still here, he would probably be smiling. That afternoon, I received an email from Nora Patel. The Harold Carter Scholarship has been officially signed. Devon Realty has sent the first funding exactly as in the contract. I read the line, and my heart dipped. Harold's name, after all these years, now appeared in a legal document not as someone gone, but as a recognized symbol of moral worth. I whispered, "Harold, you finally get to see your efforts weren't in vain." That evening, another message, Camille. "Mom, I want to meet privately to talk, not about work, about us." I looked at the words, no anger, no disdain, just tiredness. I typed back, "Not yet, Camille. When I'm ready, I'll let you know." Then I set the phone down and didn't read further. A few days later, Seb invited me to see Whitmore Capital's new project, a glass tower going up near downtown. When the elevator took us to the top floor, Chicago stretched, below river, homes, and streets crisscrossing like memories. Seb pointed outward. "This floor will be a community education and arts gallery. I want you to take a look. Maybe you'll have an idea." I walked the glass corridor, taking in the wide open space. Light poured through, making everything shimmer, opening a feeling of hope. After a while, I said, "I want a free reading corner for kids on the South Side. Many of them can't get to the library, but they still deserve to know what books are." Seb turned to me and smiled. "Perfect idea. I'll put you in charge of that part. Let's call it the Harold and Mabel Reading Corner, shall we?" I smiled, too moved to speak. "Are you sure?" "Sure. A building shouldn't just be tall, it needs a soul. And today, you just gave it one." That evening, as sunset washed the city, Seb spoke softly in the car. "In October, I have to go to Italy to oversee a project in Tuscany. Will you come with me?" I laughed. "Italy? I haven't been far from Chicago in more than 10 years. Then it's time, not to run away, but to say goodbye to fear." I was quiet. Fear, it had lived in me like a shadow, fear of being looked down on, fear of losing my son, fear of being forgotten. But as I looked out at the streetlights flicking on, I realized every fear shrinks once you start moving. "Okay, I'll go," I said, soft but sure. Seb squeezed my hand. "I knew you'd say that." That night I sat in my familiar room, a pen and a blank page on the table. I wrote to myself not to send, not for anyone else to read. The slanted letters trembled slightly but were clear. I lived too long in silence, in the fear of being looked down on, but today I know I have worth. Not because someone else says so, but because I choose to believe it. I set the pen down, folded the page, and tucked it into the old notebook where Harold once kept a list of rose varieties he wanted to plant. Outside, the breeze brushed through the garden, carrying the scent of flowers and the first chill of fall. I stood, looked out the window, and smiled. For the first time in years, the future didn't scare me. It opened quiet, warm like the morning after a storm, when everything is still wet, but sunlight has begun to slip through every leaf. 3 weeks after the public apology, a large bouquet sat at my door. Inside were carefully arranged white lilies, with a small card in a familiar hand, "Hoping for peace. Patricia Devon." I stared at the words for a long time. The flowers smelled light, elegant, and cold. I smiled and called the Children's Hospital in Chicago, where Harold had once supported a small music class before he passed. "I'd like to send this bouquet to the nurses in pediatrics. Please tell them it's from a mother who wants to thank those who still care with kindness." When the staff agreed, I felt a strange relief, like setting a stone down where it belongs. That afternoon, an email from Nora Patel. Devon Realty has completed the first year of community commitments, the Harold Carter Scholarship, the service programs, and the fund for the South Side have all been launched on time. I read each line, slowly. It was no longer a battle of wounded pride, it was the continuation of fairness. I thought of the first students receiving scholarships in Harold's name, of the kids in the neighborhood holding new books from the reading corner Seb and I built. This wasn't just my win, it was a circle closed with meaning. On Friday evening, Bryce called. "Mom, I'd like to invite you to dinner. At my house, just family." His voice was gentle, careful, like someone walking on old wood floors, afraid to make a sound. I arrived at dusk. The house glowed with soft gold, nothing like the tense air from the last time I'd been there. When I stepped into the dining room, I stopped short, the long table, and my seat was in the very center. Bryce pulled out my chair and smiled. "This is yours, Mom. I want everyone to see you." I sat, my eyes landing on the empty chair across from me, a white rose placed on its back. Bryce said softly, "I think Dad should be here too, even if it's just with a flower." I couldn't help it. I nodded. "Your father always believed a table is only truly warm when everyone is respected." That dinner was simple. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and the red wine Harold used to love. No fancy words, no soundtrack, just laughter that started shy and grew real with each story. For the first time in years, I ate in peace, not in silence. When the dishes were done, Seb leaned toward my ear, his voice soft as a breeze. For the next 20 years, let's rewrite it, shall we? I looked at him and saw the familiar smile time couldn't wear down. Okay, but this time let me choose the title, I said. He chuckled and squeezed my hand. On the way home, I thought about my journey. From row 14, where they parked me by the service area to save face, to the center of my own life. No one carried me there. I walked it myself, with pain, with steadiness, and with the belief that dignity can't be reassigned. I know forgiveness isn't a door that swings open with a single word. Forgiveness arrives only when people change long enough that apologies are no longer needed when actions prove they've learned the lesson of respect. I'll wait for that to happen, without rushing, without forcing, without holding a grudge. That evening, Camille texted, "Mom, I read the article about the Harold Carter Scholarship. I understand now. If you allow it, I want to start over." I typed my reply, each word firm. The door opens when you are truly ready to live differently, Camille. Not sooner, not later. Then I set my phone down and looked around my small home. On the table were my passport, a new travel journal, and a plane ticket to Tuscany. Seb had already messaged, "I'll pick you up at Florence Airport, and from there we start the new leg." I smiled and packed everything neatly. Tuscany is waiting, but this Chicago won't swallow me anymore. It has become the place where I stood up not with anger, but with self-respect. I opened the window. The October breeze slipped in, cool and gentle like an old touch. Streetlights spilled across the frame, lighting my face in the mirror, a woman who is no longer afraid of being forgotten, no longer sitting in the last row, but living in the front row of her own life. Thank you for staying with me all the way to this point. Maybe each of us has been pushed to the edge of a table, a story, or our own life just because someone decided we weren't important enough. But if you're still listening, I believe you've stood up from where they thought you'd sit forever. I want to hear your story. Where are you watching from in this wide world? Have you had a moment when you realized, I have worth too? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes a small share can warm someone who's quietly enduring, the way I once did. And if you want to keep walking with me through journeys of healing, finding dignity, and rebuilding trust, please like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. Not for me alone, but for everyone who's been looked down on, to let them know someone understands, and there is still hope. I'll see you in the next story, where another woman is learning to smile after the storm.